Good morning, everybody. It's David Schlotthauer here with a very important update on Invest 97L for Friday, August 2nd, 2024. So here's a zoomed out view on the GO 16 True Color Visible satellite imagery provided by Dr. Levi Cowan at tropicaltidbits.com. And we can see our wave continues to show signs of organization. We have lots of deep convection to the north of the system, and we have a lot of deep convection happening here down to the south with, again, this organizing streamer band of cirrus. These feathery white cirrus continue to show signs of some organization too, with a better established outflow channel trying to develop to the north of the system. Now, when we zoom in closely here over Cuba and the Turks and Caicos Islands on the imagery, we can see that it's not just getting better organized based on our deep convection that we have on both sides, but if we examine the system a little bit closer and we use some of the cloud cover in the lower levels and the mid levels of the atmosphere to assess what our wave looks like, it does seem to be that we're beginning to develop more southerly and southwesterly winds on the eastern side of this wave envelope. Winds come around here coming out of the easterly direction. They come in out of the northerly or northeasterly direction on the western side of the wave envelope, and it remains to be seen what is going on down here if we're beginning to get winds out of the wet north and out of the northwest, wrapping all the way around here back to the southwest on the southern side of the circulation. If I can say anything about that, there are probably signs that is beginning to develop, but we just don't know exactly, though, if that is indeed happening down here where we have another pocket of deeper convection. What might end up being helpful, though, is if we do examine some of these bursts of deep convection, do they actually move slightly to the east with time? And we're not seeing that right now. So at the moment, this does not look like a well-defined center has developed yet. And this still remains a very sharp open wave trough where we have something like this at the very moment with no consolidated possessed center with 97L at the moment. Now zooming back out here on the GO 16 satellite imagery, this is the water vapor imagery assessing the environment around 97L. What we have right now is that this trough that is to the west of the system is beginning to break down slightly, and this belt of any deep layer shear that the system might have dealt with yesterday and the day before now has fully abated the situation. So right now the system is underneath an anticyclonic shear vector cell with winds doing this in most quadrants around the system, which explains why we are beginning to see that sign where we're beginning to see outflow develop on the northern side, soon to be on the eastern side. We might already be beginning to see signs of that even on the far southern side of the system, which indicates that the environment right now that 97L is moving into is quite conducive for strengthening. But the problem here is we have Cuba, which is an area of land, and tropical systems do not like to develop over land because they're not able to feed off a lot of moisture. There's a lot of friction here. But once this system moves into the Gulf of Mexico, though, there is still going to be some kind of development here into a tropical depression or tropical storm. Now, because our tropical wave in Cuba is evolving rather quickly here, the National Hurricane Center continues to up their chances now. We have a 60% chance of this becoming a tropical depression or storm in the next couple of days as it generally moves west-northwestward at about 5 to 15 miles an hour. Over the next 7 days, there's a 90% chance of this developing. So more likely than not, we're probably going to get a tropical depression or tropical storm somewhere over the eastern Gulf of Mexico within the next week. And I want to make it clear here, NOAA is going to be flying a couple of airplanes into the system this afternoon to better assess exactly where a surface low might be trying to form. Right now, it is a very murky situation if we just look at satellite imagery, because this is going to be very important on exactly where portion of this wave will likely end up focusing. If we zoom back into the satellite imagery, the struggle in today's update, or this morning's update, is where a concentrated area of low pressure could consolidate. Because the important about that is, where is this going to launch also? So right now, if a surface low is able to develop further south, say south of Cuba here, but north of Jamaica, where we have a lot of this deep convection, then the launching point of this could be much further west than, say, if the northern portion of the wave begins to be the more dominant one, where we have a surface low, or at least a more better area of low-level spin in the atmosphere, soon to possibly drill down to the surface. Because we've got to understand here, no, we don't have a surface circulation just yet. We might have semblance of that beginning to develop, but what we do have is a well-defined mid-level circulation over this wave pocket, and it is going to be important. Do these areas of deep convection facilitate a surface circulation? Remains to be seen. And until that happens, the models are really having a hard time exactly where and when this is how this is going to all evolve. And so areas in this red here, we need to be clear about this. This is an area that could have a tropical depression or storm in the next 7 days. This is a formative chance right here in the red area. And anyone living in Tampa, Cape Coral, Pensacola, Florida, Panama City, Florida, anywhere along this coast of Florida definitely needs to be watching this. There's already a state of emergency out for the state of Florida right now because of, one, the uncertainty, and two, the degree of intensification that this could have once it gets into the eastern Gulf of Mexico. Another way to show you the unpredictability part of this system is simply looking at the model track guidance. I forgot to show you this in my last several videos, so I am terribly sorry about that. So this is again Invest 97L model track guidance of where this might end up. Now I want to be very clear, this is not the cone of uncertainty. We have seen wild shifts to the west, to the east, slowing this down, speeding this up. This is not a solidified forecast, so this could still change to the west. This could still trend back to the east for areas here in the main state of Florida, like Tampa, Florida, Cape Coral, Florida. If you are in the Big Bend of Florida, this could still change wildly, and there is, again, no solidified or validity to the forecast here. Only we can base off of guidance for the time being. And right now, this is a huge track just for 2 days out. We usually want to see things that are more tightly clustered, more kind of like what we have here near the initialization point. But instead, this is day 3 out here. And some of the systems, yeah, some of them want this to make landfall in 5 days, while others probably in a couple of days. So not only are we seeing a huge track spread with location, but also the timing is really uncertain with this system, because again, where does this consolidate? Does it consolidate down here? Does this trend more further to the west? Because again, it is still in its formative stage. That is to be announced, and hopefully when Recon flies into the system this afternoon, they will provide much better assessment on exactly where a surface low might be trying to develop, at least in the low levels and at the surface, to hopefully feed that data into the models to better correct them. Because right now, we have a lot of uncertainty, wild outcomes with this system. And right now, still over Pensacola versus, well, maybe Orlando, Florida, to the south of Tampa Bay where Ian made landfall near Cape Coral. Yeah, we have really big distance here on exactly who is going to get what. Now, if you thought the track guidance was very tricky to pin down, well, the intensity forecast is no stranger danger to this situation. Here's a look at the model intensity guidance here, and this is basically kind of a look at the ensemble, the overall agreement on what models are generally thinking. So right now they are generally thinking that this will strengthen to a tropical storm right through the 48 to 60 hour period. But when this makes landfall, how long it takes to glide up the East Gulf of Mexico is going to be very important. And then it weakens because it moves over land, and then re-intensification on the other side is also a possibility once this emerges off of, say, Jacksonville, Florida, into the off the southeastern coast of the United States, like the Carolinas. We can see strengthening again, or re-strengthening. Now, it is also important to note here, there is ceilings to this forecast, a more outlier scenario. A few models indicate that this could become a hurricane, which right now, at the moment, there is a 50-50 chance for that to occur. I am not expecting a hurricane in my outlook or in my morning package here. And right now, my intensity forecast is down the middle here with most of the guidance. And I do expect this to reach winds of about 50 to maybe 60 miles an hour in the next 60 hours. But again, not even aiming this to a category 1. And then after that, I do see dramatic weakening, possibly to a tropical depression before re-strengthening on the other side, probably to a low-end tropical storm at the moment. But there are other models out there that I won't show. We're going to just look at the ensembles because there is that level of uncertainty that we have not dealt with this year with any tropical system in quite some time. So I will go ahead and not show any of the deterministic forecasts, and we're going to really be focusing on ensembles in today's update. Just again, because if I show one model run, then I could potentially freak people out, and we really don't need that. Now the question is, what would the ceiling be if everything was in place that would allow rapid intensification? That is very light shear, lots of moisture, upper ocean heat content, and sea surface temperatures. So this is another way of looking at the ship's guidance. So there's a text version of it, and then there's a more family-friendly version of this. This is the family version, easy to understand and easy to digest and extrapolate. So what SHIPS stands for here is Statistical Hurricane Intensity Prediction System. All right, SHIPS, that's kind of an acronym for that. And this is the GFS sister version of initializing and seeing, based on the shear here, based on the sea surface temperatures, this is what might end up happening. And right now, this is the 12Z output showing us that the max intensity here is 175 knots. Now, of course, we're not going to see that happen because there's other factors that now might become in play that prevent this of significantly strengthening in the Gulf of Mexico. And one of those will be the wind shear. Right now, over the next 2 or 3 days, wind shear is going to be light, anywhere between 5 to 10 knots. But now most of the model guidance from the GEFS ensemble and its deterministic forecast, including now some of our other models like the hurricane models, indicate that our shear now could become into the moderate levels, possibly as high as 20 to even 25 knots over the eastern Gulf of Mexico from more of the westerly direction. That's important because now, instead of the system in a more conducive environment, this might be disheveled with most of the fat side of the system to the east of the center with more of the rainfall. Sea surface temperatures also very warm, so that's not an inhibiting factor in this situation. It's going to be more of the wind shear, and it does appear now that there's going to be a little bit more drier air with relative humidities less than 50%. You don't even want those. You want these more than 65 or 70%. So that's basically, we're going to put an X on this, and we're going to put an X on this. So two variables here are not going to allow the system to develop very well. And that is why in today's update, we're seeing a consistency that this is going to struggle a little bit more than what we first thought in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. But I want to make it clear there will be some sort of strengthening with this in the Gulf. So I'm not saying that the shear is going to prevent intensification altogether. I think we're going to see a tropical storm of some magnitude in the Eastern Gulf in the next 2 or 3 days. Just let's be clear on that. So now the question is, on the GEFS Ensemble forecast, where could this head? There is still a major spread in the guidance in today's update, or in this morning's update. I'll have an afternoon one this afternoon, a live stream. So what we have right now is most of the guidance on the GEFS Ensemble is directly over Florida. So like Orlando, Florida, Cape Coral, Florida. If you're in Tampa, Florida over here, most of the guidance has it over here, over this region, right? And then re-strengthening into a more stronger tropical storm thereafter, potentially. Again, I want to be clear, lots of uncertainty if this will actually end up happening. There are some models now that are downplaying this a little bit once this emerges or re-emerges out over the Atlantic, because now where this re-emerges is very important. If it's much closer to the coast when it re-emerges, that might not allow it to strengthen very much, versus if it re-emerges further out to sea here and then curves back around like this, it might have enough water time to be able to re-intensify a little bit more quickly. But now, when we take a look at the ECMWF Ensemble forecast, this is the 060 run. So what I'm showing you here is both of those runs that came out on the 06Z timeframe, so overnight last night. And what we have here is the GEFS Ensemble way over here. Okay, so the black line really shows the easternmost extent of the probabilistic forecast. And when we look at our European, here is the westernmost uncertainty. So if we look at this, and let me turn my pin off here and let me re-highlight this, we're seeing something that looks like that. So still potentially over Panama City Beach, over Pensacola, Florida, the Big Bend of Florida here. The European still westerly. So most of the model members still offshore here and still show decent strengthening. In fact, some of these green lines do indicate winds of even 50 knots. That's about 60 or 55 to 60 miles an hour. So again, still a lot of uncertainty here, even on the European Ensemble forecast. Again, there's a lot of uncertainty here, and I wish I can say we have an answer. It's going to make landfall right here, instead of saying, oh, there's a lot of uncertainty. No, we don't have that situation. It is very uncertain right now until we get a consolidated system. And I'm hoping that the recon missions conducted today will better assess exactly where this might be forming, instead of just kind of second-hand guessing off a satellite. Now, what is more for sure than not is sea surface temperatures here in the Gulf of Mexico are running seriously warm. And I don't rarely say this very much, but these are alarmingly warm for this time of the year. So if we zoom in and look at this a little bit closer, we can see sea surface temperatures here. Here's a small patch along Cape Coral and Tampa Bay. Yes, Tampa Bay is right here. Water temperatures are 32 to 33 Celsius. That is 90 to 91 degrees Fahrenheit. That is not cold at all for this system. We're even seeing waters warming up dramatically off the Louisiana coast, even Mobile, Alabama, seeing water temperatures of 32 Celsius or about 89, 90 Fahrenheit. And so this whole patch here, when the system emerges, where it emerges, will be very important. How long this spins over the Gulf waters. Now, I did say that there's a lot of wind shear here of about 15 to 20 knots, but because of how warm these Gulf waters are, 15 to 20 knots for this system might be rather low in relative sense to these sea surface temperatures, because they're so warm. That could allow explosive convection to develop over its system. So that's why we're expecting some kind of strengthening, even if we have 15, 17, or even 20 knot wind shear, or even perhaps a little stronger than that. Sea surface temperature anomalies definitely above average here, 1 to 2 Celsius, so that hasn't changed since a couple of days ago, where we're seeing some really warm waters, even getting a little warmer here in this little patch, almost 3 Celsius there locally. So in other words, there is a lot of energy for this system in the Gulf once this gets into the Gulf. Now, the question is, why is this going to turn north, and why could it slow down substantially? Now, we're not expecting a stall on the ensembles right now, but it doesn't surprise me if we do see a significant slowdown, say that instead of the system moving 10, maybe 15 miles an hour, we could see this slow down to say 5 or 8 miles an hour, in other words. And the reason why that happens is still like we talked about a couple of days ago or the last few days when we talked about this system, is we do have this trough of low pressure which generated a lot of thunderstorms, some gusty winds, some MCVs, this kind of not really a derecho, but really organized complex of storms because of this trough. But our wave is down here. So when we play this through, we can see that while the trough at first is allowed to grab this to the north, because again, we do have this weakness in the ridge. So we have a ridge here and we have a ridge here. And then there's a weakness. There's a break in the subtropical ridge to its north. So obviously, least resistance, the system's going to want to turn north because there's not much of an obstacle avoiding that turn to the north to begin with. So once we go into day 2, we see now that this trough now is a little bit further south than, say, 2 days ago, when this trough was actually going to be moving out of the picture a little sooner, and our system was a little bit further south, which explains why that the system was able to go a little further west, drift, and even stall out, do something like this, hit Louisiana, or do some crazy scenarios and go off to the northeast. If we look at the previous model runs from the GEFS ensemble, we can see, if we just go back quite a few runs ago, we can see our 588 decameter height line. Keep an eye on this, right? So there's our height line. Our system's way off the screen here. And when we go forward, actually it's down here at the same time. We go forward here, and we can see now our trough is a little further south here. So you can see the 588 decameter height, and then you got your low, your upper level disturbance, well, at 500 millibars. It's actually further north here, which explains why the GFS wants this to turn much sooner than not versus the European ensemble. And if we take a look at that, we can see, again, if we go out to 48 hours, we can see there is still a difference here. Again, in reference, 588 decameter height line. Here's our system here. Go to the next model over. The system here on the European is much further to the south. And not only that, our upper level disturbance at 500 millibars over the northeastern US is not stretching as far south as what the GEFS ensemble was showing, which explains why the European has this still further west on its ensemble output versus the GEFS ensemble, which makes a whole bit of difference, which means there's still 2 different scenarios here. If the system arrives further west later before this trough is able to move out of the way, then this could get further west and then eventually drift. Because once that trough leaves, we start getting a ridge to develop. All right, so that's going to be very critical here in about 3 days where this is going to be at, because this ridge, once this ridge builds in, we have another ridge over here that develops. You're going to get very weak steering currents. There's nothing to push this north, push this east, or push this west. And it could just sit here for a couple of days before the overall weather pattern then yanks us in generally possibly to the northeast again. Now, just to review with what we talked about in today's morning update briefing on 97L. Again, bringing lots of inclement weather over central and western Cuba or eastern Cuba. Jamaica taking a big beating with a lot of thunderstorms and some heavy rainfall. The Turks and Caicos Islands getting some rain last night. More rain coming today. So we get some of these bands. Strong winds you can definitely bet coming in out of the southeasterly direction around the northern portion of this wave. And again, this to develop in the eastern Gulf of Mexico remains fairly high right now. There's a 90% chance from the National Hurricane Center, like we said, and you need to take this still seriously, folks. This does have a ceiling on it for a high-end tropical storm, and at this point, it doesn't matter if this is a tropical storm or not. There's going to be a lot of rainfall over most of Florida, perhaps as much as 7 or 8 inches of rainfall. Storm surge, a sure thing with this, and high surf, elevated surf along the coast of Florida. So all in all, even so this is a tropical storm or a non-tropical storm and maybe a tropical depression, there are going to be impacts, and this needs to be taken with a grain of salt still, based on what we talked about in today's update. But anyways, if you did enjoy this morning's update on Invest 97L, please consider subscribing. Hit that red subscribe button, folks. Subscribe button. I want to make sure I was clear. Hit the like button. Share this video with your family and friends on social media. And never forget to also ring the bell notification icon for latest updates. That's going to do with this morning's update. I'll be back with you more later on this afternoon with another update on this disturbance.